7 o'clock on the dot. Welcome to everyone that's here and to everybody that's online. Really appreciate you attending. We're on our, can you believe we've done, this is the fifth one already, just one to go. The weeks have flown by. I really hope that something that's been said over the last 4 weeks and today for some people helps you in some way. I just hope that, I've just learned, I can waffle away, but the Holy Spirit's the one that does the work, particularly when you're sharing the Bible. Sometimes it's a verse that you haven't thought about for years that the Lord will just suddenly bring to your mind, and that's always my hope. Today is the one course of the 6 that I'm presenting that's really to do with not so much a Bible study, but more why I'm not an atheist. And I think this is such an important subject that I had to include a lesson on this one. I think a lot of people feel that if we're a believer, if we're Christians, we live by faith. You kind of don't really, you're not engaging your intellect at all. You're just believing in stuff, and obviously atheists would think, you believe in Santa Claus and the fairies and the Easter Bunny and Jesus, and they kind of put it all in one basket. And so we're seen as people that aren't intellectual, that don't really have any basis for what we teach or believe. We're just really just going by faith and feeling and getting caught up in the moment and hoping that when we die, we'll go to heaven. But there are very, very good reasons why I'm not an atheist. Very good reasons. Now, obviously, a lot of the reasons I'm not an atheist are simply because I have faith. I've felt the presence of God. I've seen the benefit of Christianity. There's a lot of reasons I could give you, but today I really just want to talk about sort of as in some of the intellectual reasons why Christianity and choosing to follow Jesus is an intellectually more satisfying choice than atheism. I just don't think atheism's intellectually satisfying at all. In fact, I often come away from studying atheism thinking that it requires more faith than Christianity does. So why I'm not an atheist, we'll have a look at that. What I do want to say is that this is such a difficult subject to taught, and I've taught it so many times, and every time I teach it, I get the feeling that nobody's really got it, and that it's gone over their heads, not because they're stupid or they don't understand, but because I'm not dealing with trivial items. I'm not trying to tell you how Cain found his wife or how they put the animals on the ark. You can Google that. If I'm dealing this subject with why I'm not an atheist and why I believe in Jesus, I have to deal with the big ticket items, the real questions. Otherwise, what's the point? And so real questions, unfortunately, require a real difficult explanations. And so it's very difficult for me to take a big ticket question, where does consciousness arise from, and try to explain it to you and give you the pros and the cons in a simple way that's not going to make this a 4-day course. A course like this I would normally run over many weeks. However, let's see how we go today. I'm pretty excited about this. I do want to say that a lot of the stuff that I'm going to do today, I'll for example, present you with a list of items. I'm not going to go through all those items or expect you to understand those items. The reason they're there is so that you at least have an awareness that these things exist, and then you can go and look at it for yourself. I just can't go through the horizon problem. Okay, I'll tell you there's a problem, the horizon problem, but I don't expect you to understand what that is, just to have awareness of, there is an actual argument against this called the horizon problem, and you're welcome to go look at it if you want to. So, because it just takes, in previous lessons I've actually gone into it in a lot more detail and people just get a little bit lost. So there you go. Exciting stuff. Are you all feeling encouraged? All right, the first big question, and the first reason why I'm not an atheist, is that anything that is created requires a creator or requires a cause, okay? Anything that is created requires a creator or requires a cause. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, what caused the first cause? What is the prime mover? What is that which caused the very first event? So we want to talk about creation and cause. So we know that events require an explanation. Agreed? If you see something like that, you're going to ask yourself, how did that happen? How did this occur? It's natural. Every event that we see happening, we understand that there's something that led to that event, something that presupposed it. So everything requires an explanation. We know that something cannot create itself. Yes? We know that something cannot create itself. It requires an explanation. So, let's have a look at what the atheist would teach you about creation. What are the theories? If I'm an atheist, what is it that I'm going to tell you to support the fact that what caused creation? How did creation come about? What caused it to happen? So the first theory that everybody's familiar with here, I'm sure that all of you have heard. Who's not heard of the Big Bang Theory? We all know the Big Bang Theory? Everybody's heard of it. So the big explanation and the most prominent explanation today of the creation of all things, starting with the universe itself, is the Big Bang Theory. And it was proposed by a Catholic priest, by the way. Can you believe that? By the name of George Lemaitre in 1931. And he posited the fact that the universe began from a singularity and has been expanding and evolving ever since. A singularity is a hypothetical particle that contains infinite amounts of mass, infinite amounts of energy, takes up zero space, and is outside of time. Now, you can imagine that that is a pretty weird particle. It's never been seen. It's only sort of speculated and tried to be proved mathematically. But this singularity, this particle that contains infinite mass, infinite energy, lives outside of time, and is basically infinitely small, suddenly decided one day that it was going to explode. Now, I don't want to use the word explode, because that's not the right word, but it created essentially space and time. Starting to sound like God already, isn't it? So the singularity explodes, and one of the things that they've had to do is nobody knows why it suddenly decided to explode, or it just did. And we know that the universe is massive. And the only way we can account for the size of the universe and the fact that the universe is homogeneous in all areas of space is that they propose something called inflation. So what they're saying is that this particle basically exploded, and within trillionths of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second expanded far faster than the speed of light into what we know as the universe, and has been expanding ever since. So the first problem there obviously is the singularity. We have never seen one or know of one. It's speculative. And of course the inflation is something that we've never seen either, but we're just assuming it happened. Then this inflation formed what we know as a quark gluon plasma. It's like a hot, incredibly hot quark plasma stuff, filled space. After a period of time, millions and millions of years, apparently subatomic subatomic particles started to form, hydrogen formed, helium formed, then lithium formed, and then eventually stars and galaxies began to form from the helium and from the hydrogen and from the lithium under gravity collapse into stars. These stars eventually, of course, formed galaxies. And then the stars eventually, over millions of years, burned themselves out and died and exploded in the supernova, causing heavy elements to be in the universe. And then from those remnants of those stars that exploded, supposedly planets then started to form around the stars. And then, of course, we've got what we got today. And that's essentially the Big Bang Theory. Now, and that is the most scientifically popular and adhered to theory that there is today. even as I'm reading through it, I just find it so difficult to believe but everybody accepts it primarily because there isn't really an alternative. So there's a lot of problems with the Big Bang Theory. And as I said to you, I've just given you a list of stuff. I can't explain all 12 things to you, and there's a lot more than that. But there I just put 12 problems that exist with the Big Bang Theory. And I'll just mention a couple of them. Obviously, the Big Bang Theory requires laws to exist in order for the Big Bang Theory to do the things that it does. For example, the Big Bang Theory says that gluons and quarks are created, and these eventually create subatomic particles like hydrogen and helium. Well, there's a lot of laws that are required for helium and hydrogen to form weak electromagnetic force, the weak force, the strong force. All of these forces, all of these laws have to be there in place for that to happen. Where did the laws come from? They have to presuppose the existence of the universe. It violates the law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It violates the law of force first cause. What we're saying there is that every action requires a preceding action. What is the preceding action that caused the singularity to suddenly decide to explode? What caused that to happen? Everything requires a first cause. It requires explanations for the existence of vertical particles, but mostly, number 6, it doesn't really address the creation of the universe. It doesn't tell you where the singularity came from or why it exploded. It kind of just addresses the evolution of the universe, but not really its creation. There's a whole lot of problems around the CMD. The existence of dark matter and dark energy have to be postulated. A whole bunch of stuff. And I've just listed them there, and I won't go through them all. There's problems with the Big Bang, serious problems. In fact, the Big Bang Theory itself has been tweaked and adjusted constantly. One of the big things that's caused a big problem with the Big Bang recently is the James Webb Telescope. Now, we would expect the James Webb Telescope was expecting to look back into the early universe because it looks back in time, and was expecting to see exactly what I've just said here: subatomic particles, lots of hydrogen, lots of lithium, very young stars, small little galaxies. They found the exact opposite. Massive big galaxies that must have taken billions of years to form, and it's causing some real big issues at the moment for the Big Bang Theory. The problem is there isn't really anything else. The other theory that is fairly popular and becoming more and more popular is what we call the steady state theory and several other eternal universe theories. Now, the Big Bang Theory isn't really liked very much because it presupposes a beginning. And as soon as you have a beginning, it kind of invokes the whole biblical thing of in the beginning, God created. They don't like that. And I knew years and years ago, I knew somebody's going to come up with the fact that in order to get around that problem, what we'll do is we'll say the universe is eternal. And so there's theories today around the eternal universe theory. The steady state theory in 1948 by Fred Hoyle supposes that the universe is eternal and unchanging with the continuous creation of matter. And so there's this whole thing around that the universe is eternal. It doesn't have a beginning. It's always been there. It's starting to sound like an alternative for God again, isn't it? The difference is, of course, we're talking about matter here. God is not matter. So, when you start talking about matter, it becomes a problem. So again, there's a whole lot of responses to the steady state theory. It requires the continuous creation of matter out of nothing. It is inconsistent with observed properties of the universe. But most of all, it requires us to deal with a paradox. And I can't spend too much time on this, but please understand, you can see the dominoes. Every domino that falls presupposes that there was a domino that fell before it, yes? Which presupposes there was a domino that fell before it, all the way back to the first cause or the prime mover, which would have been somebody caused the first domino to tip. If you've got a universe that is eternal, that has no beginning, how long is it going to take the first domino to tip all the rest of the dominoes to reach you in an eternal, non-beginning universe? You can understand that events that happened in infinity will never, ever reach you. there should be no, in an eternal universe, you should have no events occurring, because the first cause would never have caused the successive events to happen long enough to reach you, because there's a beginningless beginning. Does that make sense to you? Am I explaining that right? I've put it here in better words. It causes a paradox because an infinite temporal succession or regression of successive causes cannot exist. We would have no events happening today. We would have no stars in the sky. We would have nothing, because the first event, its successor and its successor and its successor would still never have reached us, because there's an infinite beginning. Moving on. Real problem with that. It's not possible for you to have physical, material things that exist in infinity. Even math tells you that. There's other theories of the universe. The epipyrotic universe theory, the cycling universe theory, and the multi-universe theory. These are just other theories that people have thrown up, and I've given you 5 theories. So the Big Bang, steady state, universe theories, and these 3. These are basically the 5 theories that are out there today. All of these theories here are pretty weird. If you've watched Marvel, you will all know about the multiverses and that, where they're presupposing other universes. Let's be honest here. When you start talking about other universes, you're really starting to go to the realm of almost the supernatural. It takes a lot of faith, and it can never be proved. So there's these other theories that are talking about. The problem with these 3 theories is none of them address how the universe began. They talk about a universe expanding and then collapsing and bouncing back and expanding again and then collapsing again and then expanding again. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But something had to create the first universe that made the first bounce. They talk about endless cycles. That's fine. I don't mind. You can have endless cycles of birth and dying and rebirth and dying. But there had to be a first birth for there to be a first redying. None of them address any of those problems. All they're really doing is kicking the can down the road. They don't answer the problem. And so these are real problems that people are having to address. So none of the theories explain the cause of the first cause. They kick the can further down the road. None of them are scientifically demonstrable. They're not observable, testable, or repeatable. I love this comment here. Having all possible universes is not an explanation, because by invoking everything, you're actually explaining nothing. All right. So basically, I love the three monkeys there. It's a case of we don't know how it starts. So we don't want to see, we don't want to hear, we don't want to. This is the way it is. I love 2 Thessalonians 2:10-11. It talks about people that refuse to love the truth and be saved. Therefore, God sends them a delusion so that they can believe what is demonstrably false. I don't understand how people can believe in the multiverses and call themselves scientists, or they can believe in all of these weird things. It's just nuts. It takes too much faith for me. So
what was there before the beginning of the universe?
Can you just turn that up a little bit? Thanks.
What was there before the beginning of the universe?
We don't know. But we got top people working on it. We don't know. There might have been a multiverse that's birthing universes, and we're one of them, but that just pushes the question one step further before that. So we just don't know. It's a frontier question.
That the Big Bang was an interesting event, but not the first event in the totality of reality. It could have been the first event that sparked the expansion of our part of space. But it could be that there's a grander realm of space within which we sit as a small part, and that grander realm may have been here for a far longer period of time. It may have experienced its own Big Bangs, maybe a collection of Big Bangs that may extend infinitely far into the past. So it could be that the answer to the question of what happened before the Big Bang is a lot of other Big Bangs or a lot of other quantum events that were taking place in a larger landscape of reality than we have direct access.
Where the laws of nature came from. We don't know all the answers. We don't know why the universe began in the way that it did, if indeed it had a beginning. Big Bang was very, very highly ordered. It's the only difference between the past and the future. So that in the past, the universe was really ordered, and it's getting more disordered. That's necessary state of order at the start of the universe, which is really the reason that we exist. That's the reason. We don't know why that was. We'll probably find out at some point, and it'll be something to do with the laws of nature.
So a couple of observations there. You will hear that the use of the word may, might, we think an awful lot. And you heard him reference there the laws of the universe. Well, where did the laws of the universe come from? So it's a mess. The truth of the matter is, as I said, they don't know. We don't know. We can postulate, we can guess. It is a more satisfying intellectual conclusion to believe in an intelligent being who is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and eternal, who lives outside of time and space, creating matter, than to believe matter created itself out of nothing. Atheism, the belief that there was nothing, and nothing happened to nothing, and then nothing magically exploded for no reason, creating a bunch of everything, and then the bunch of everything magically rearranged itself for no reason whatsoever into self-replicating bits, which then turned into dinosaurs. Makes perfect sense. Been a little cheeky there, but the fact of the matter is that it's a complicated question. And Scripture teaches that creation was caused by an eternal, all-powerful and intelligent being who exists outside of space and time, who we refer to as our Creator God. And the Scriptures tell us in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We see in Colossians 1:16, for by Him all things were created, things in heaven and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Him and by Him and for Him. Job 12:7-10, it is He who makes the earth by His power, who established the world by His wisdom, and by His understanding stretched out the heavens. I would deal with the age-old question, well, who created God? But I'm not going to go there right now. But the issue is that atheism, for me, particularly when it comes to creation, has no intellectual basis or satisfaction for me. The second really big question is, we've talked about creation requires a creator. This one is design requires a designer, or design requires intelligence. We are trying to ask the question, where does design come from, or where does information come from? The second big question. If you were to walk around, you would instinctively recognize something designed. If I told you that I found this in the desert, and it was created by the natural movement of the sun, the wind, and the sand in the desert, look what it's managed to do, would you be impressed? Would you believe me? Probably not, because we understand that this is a man-made object, it's designed, and we understand that behind this design there is intelligence, a mind. We instinctively recognize that. If you were to go and see any of these objects that I've got behind you, you would know that these are not things that have been created naturally by Mother Nature. We recognize design. I love that verse that Jesus refers to in 12:27 of Luke. He says, consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his glory was not arranged or arrayed like one of these. Jesus appreciated the complexity of design. And so we understand when something's designed. And the big thing about design is that design requires a plan. Nobody just decided that they're going to just throw a whole bunch of plastic, metal, and glass together, mix it up in a pot, and voila, this popped out. Nobody believes that, because we understand that if you're going to design something, you need first of all to understand what the end goal is, the objective. I'm going to make a phone, or I'm going to make a car, or I'm going to, all right? You need to then have a plan. That plan needs to be worked out, and then it needs to be documented in a blueprint somehow. It needs to be communicated. It needs to be stored somehow. And then that plan needs to be actually acted upon and built. And finally, once it's built, it needs to be tested and refined to make sure that it works. Those are just obvious steps when you're making anything that's designed. I had a bit of a giggle at that, showing when people design something without planning about it with a pencil there, too cool to do drugs. And you can see that somebody didn't think that one through very clearly, because by the end you're basically being encouraged to do drugs. But yes, that's a classic example of the fact that anything that's designed requires foreknowledge. Design requires planning. Planning requires an objective. An objective requires information, and information requires a mind. It requires intelligence. So when I see design in the world all around me, I shared that the other day, a few weeks ago, that I was greatly moved and came back to God when I saw a butterfly flying and landing on a flower. It wasn't, you think, oh, that's a bit silly. It's because the sheer magnificence of the fact that a butterfly can actually fly. We can't make things that fly, anything like that. That it could find the flower, that it could land, that it's just the design of that, and the enormity of just that act is phenomenal. We can't even begin to think of how to do that today. And so there's a number of theories that atheists have for design. I mean, you've got to ask yourself, if you're an atheist and you see design in nature, what do you can't say it's God because you're an atheist. So what are you going to do? And there's basically three theories for design in atheism. I'm not going to go through them in detail again. I just want you to be aware that they exist. The first one is what they call complex emergence. And in fact, these work together. Complex emergence basically says that if you take a number of small things, data points, and you put them together in sufficient number and in sufficient proximity to one another, they will, complexity, as it becomes more and more complex and you put more and more data points in, complexity will give rise to intelligence. Or actually they say complex systems, but by complex systems, they're actually ultimately referring to consciousness. So if you put enough data points together, enough simple components together, and you increase the number exponentially, and they are in proximity to one another, they're basically saying that emergence will occur when a complex entity has properties or behaviors that parts that do not have on their own, and emerge when they interact in a wider whole. What they're basically saying then is that two heads is better than one, yes? That the sum of the whole is better than the sum of the individual parts. They're essentially saying if you put enough individual parts together, the sum of the whole will be greater than the sum of the individual parts. They begin to communicate and complexity arises. And people obviously are jumping very much on the AI bandwagon, which is a classic example of where you've got massive amounts of information that has been data points that are being thrown together, and complexity is arising out of this. The big question is, though, is consciousness arising? Is intelligence arising? Or are we just having so many cross-references and so many data points that it looks as though this thing is alive and intelligent? But we all know that this is not a living creature and not a living being. It's not a mind. So complex emergence is a theory that if you make something big enough and complex enough that eventually intelligence will arise, it presupposes that the reason we have intelligence and the reason that we are conscious is because we have trillions of neurons communicating one another in our brain. I've got no doubt that one day we will have enough computer components, enough processing power that will duplicate the trillions of neurons that we have in a human brain. But I'm still supremely confident that it will not be a living mind. It will not have intelligence. So the other thing then when they talk about this is that this intelligence that emerges from complex organisms becoming complex is then written into our DNA code and then passed on through our DNA to our progeny, and they also learn, and that DNA gets updated, and then that's passed on and the DNA gets updated. And of course natural selection, okay, preservation of the fittest ensures that those with the best information survive because they're smarter than the others. And so eventually we end up really smart people. One of the problems, of course, is they've gone back hundreds of years, thousands of years, and looked at supposedly nomadic, simple, uneducated savages, and found that they're in fact extremely intelligent, capable of doing things that we're absolutely astounded. I could talk a little bit about some of the artifacts that they found that just blow people's minds. Anyway, the point that I want to make is that they don't know. We don't know how information came about, how intelligence came about. Richard Dawkins says, when you look at something that's highly designed in nature, he says, biology is the study of complicated things that have the appearance of having been designed with purpose. Well, that's as close to coming to say, he's basically saying it has been designed, it has purpose, but it's only in appearance. Well, that's a fine line to cut. So atheism's theories of design and information in design, what is the response that we can make as Christians, as theists? Well, I want to talk about three things that I'll just quickly whip through them that give me a lot of confidence that design is not something that just emerged by throwing enough brain cells in one place together, all right? Number one is what we call the information enigma. Information cannot spontaneously create itself, okay? We understand that experience, real life experience, my everyday experience tells me that information requires intelligence to produce it. You can't tell me, give me a piece of information like, do you know that elephants can smell with their trunk, drink water with their trunk, and use their trunk as an arm? Isn't that fascinating? It's a really flexible object. And I'm not going to say, oh, you just guessed that. That is information that you gave me that I know is based on experience. And so I know that information requires intelligence to produce it. Real life demonstrates that intelligence always originates from a mind. Can you think of any examples of where you have got intelligent information from something that's not a mind? Now, you can go to an AI. This was easier when there was no AI, by the way. But you can go to AI and you can get information. But is it truly intelligent information? Or is it just data points that have been looked up and calculated and spat out? So a mind, intelligence always originates from a mind. Information is not this is the big thing. Information is not material. It's not a material property. It's nothing you can touch or grow or touch. It's not a material object. It's non-material. It's not a property of matter. How do you have something originating that's not even matter? Information requires rules. One of the greatest things about information is that I could give you a word, a sentence, see the dog. You understand, if you were to see that written on a board, you would understand it because you understand that there's rules behind that sentence. There's rules of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's rules that say that this is a word and it has a space between it and it separates it from another word. There's rules about verbs and nouns and adjectives and pronouns. There's rules that say that if you're going to spell a word, the word dog, there needs to be the letter D, which is right next to the letter O, which is right next to the letter G. There's rules, a lot of rules behind that. And so information isn't just of any value to you unless you understand the syntax and the information and the rules behind that. So that's the interesting key. And then we'll say here, information requires rules to interpret its meaning. And then lastly, random changes are proven to always generate gibberish, not information. If I gave you a plate of soup and you read that and I say, isn't that amazing? That just happened accidentally when I pulled it out of the pot. You would laugh at me because you would know that that information doesn't happen automatically, and you can understand what I'm trying to tell you there. If I gave that to my wife or my girlfriend, you understand what I'm saying there because there's that information that's been conveyed. You understand that there's rules behind that and what I'm trying to say. There's purpose in that information. It's intelligent information. It's information that has a rule behind it and a purpose behind it. It's not just data. It's not just, okay, it's got structure, it's got meaning, it's got purpose. And so these things, where do they arise from? I can just create a whole bunch of letters now and throw them on the floor and say, there, you got information, intelligent information. That's nothing, that's just data. But when I start arranging it in sequences and teaching you the meaning of the words, then it becomes living information. So the information enigma here.
Why does information theory suggest that there must be some sort of designer?
It's actually helpful first to go back to the molecular biological revolution of the 1950s. In 1957, 1958, Crick, who was interestingly a code breaker in World War II, posits what's known as the sequence hypothesis, which is just a breakthrough moment in the history of biology, where he realizes that the nucleotide bases on the inside of the double helix are functioning like alphabetic characters in a written language, which is to say it's not the physical or chemical properties of those bases that is important to their function. That it's not mere Shannon information, it's information that's functional. And that's the kind of information that, in our experience, always indicates the prior activity of an intelligence. If it's just a random arrangement, it might be undirected processes. But if it's very specific and complex, and it's operating in accord with a symbol convention, then you've got information that is the product of mind.
I think he said it better than I could. All right. It's specific, it's complex, it has purpose, it's information. All right. And obviously he's referring there to the code within DNA. That is encoded information to make a person. The DNA contains coded information to make flesh and bone. All right, just moving on. The second one, so the first one there, was the information enigma. Information cannot create itself. It has to come from a mind. The second reason why I can't believe in design the way the atheist does is something called irreducible complexity. When you look at design, you get to a certain point where you realize that in order for this thing to do what it needs to do, it has to have all the parts. Does that make sense to me? And I'm using the example of a mousetrap here. A mousetrap, okay, is a good example of something that's very close to irreducible complexity, meaning you can't simplify it any further. If you try to simplify this mousetrap any further, what's going to happen? It's not going to work. If I take away the holding bar, or the catch, or the hammer, or the spring, or the bait, or the trigger, or the base, if I take away any one of those parts, the mousetrap will no longer trap the mouse. So when we look at design in nature, we see things in nature, and I'll show you a couple of them now, that have been intricately designed, but they are irreducibly complex. What we mean by that is that unless all of those components exist at the same time and work together at the same time, nothing works. So how does that evolve? How does something evolve if it's needing, let's assume that I've got a watch in front of me. The cogs evolve, the hands of the watch evolve, the body of the watch evolves, the strap evolves, but none of them know about each other, and none of them are of any use until all of them have evolved fully, come together and work together. You understand what I'm trying to say? Everything, design is, the requirement of design is that it's just not one thing, it's a whole series of things that have to evolve simultaneously and instantly together to work. Can you imagine an eyeball evolving without a brain or an optic nerve? It's thinking to itself, you know, one of these days in a million years' time, I'm really hoping that the optic nerve and the brain evolve so that I can finally see. It's just stupid. And so irreducible complexity means that something needs to come into being simultaneously. And we can see that if we look at some of these examples of what I'm calling molecular machines, and that's the third reason why I can't believe in atheists' clue of design. Your body contains trillions upon trillions of cells, trillions of them. Uncountable numbers of cells. Within each one of those cells, you have got kinesin and you have got ATP. And I've got a third one there, bacterial flagella. I normally show videos on all, but I'm not going to do that because we don't have the time. Bacterial flagella, you've seen bacteria movies of bacteria moving. You notice they've got a tail at the back. That tail spins at something like 20,000 revolutions per second, and it propels them through the medium. Okay, so that's how bacteria move. They've got these spinning tails. It's called a flagella. That flagella is actually connected to an electric motor. Okay, and that motor contains all of the elements of a normal motor. It contains a hook, a body. My eyes aren't good enough to see all the bits. I normally break this down into all the components. It's got 32 different components that make up the motor, including gears. It shifts gears into different, and it can reverse as well. So it's got all of the components of a motor in a bacterial flagella's tail. It's an amazing piece of technology. But I'm not going to show you that one. I'll show you a one on kinesin. Kinesin is a postman that exists in virtually every cell in your body, trillions upon trillions of them, and they walk on pathways within your body. The pathway gets created automatically in front of it as it's walking. It walks along your body, and it carries components that are needed to make your body. It literally carries them in two arms. And it carries them like this on its back, and it walks along, and it delivers them to where it needs to go. And lets it go, and then it turns around, and it finds another package. If two of them come together, one waits for the other one and makes room for it. If it gets stuck, it asks for help. Sometimes it takes its package and gives it to somebody else. It needs to know what package it's picking up. It needs to know how to get to its destination. It needs the address of the destination. It needs to know all of these things. Can you imagine an Uber driver? You're saying, I want to go somewhere, but I'm not going to call you and I'm not going to tell you when. Information is required. So these things, there are trillions of them in your body. I'll show you a quick video of a kinesin. I also wanted to show you one on ATP, but I haven't got the time. ATP is the power cell, the battery of your body. Okay, it powers every cell in your body. In fact, the legs that are walking on this kinesin are powered by an ATP motor. That is a photon motor. We're not even able to make them today. It runs by photons. It's the most efficient motor in the universe. It is 100% efficient. We're not even close to making a motor like that. Again, consists of many, many parts. But I'll show you kinesin working in your body quickly.
Cells are full of specialized components that perform functions vital to their existence. But how do these components get to the right locations inside the cell to perform their functions? For larger components, a transportation system is needed. Meet the kinesin. Masterpieces of microengineering, kinesins are miniature motorized machines that carry cargo from one part of the cell to another, walking along self-assembling highways called microtubules. Known as the workhorses of the cell, kinesins have 2 feet, or globular heads, that literally walk 1 foot over another along the microtubule, pulling their cargo to its destination. Each foot possesses 2 special locations called binding sites that interact with other molecules. One site attaches to the microtubule and the other binds with ATP, the energy molecule of the cell. When one foot binds with ATP and uses its energy, the foot flips over, resulting in the walking motion. Each foot has a short neck which is connected to a strand of a long coiled stalk. At the end of the stalk is a fan-shaped tail which holds tightly to the cargo being transported. This coordinated stepwise movement allows kinesin motors to walk as many as 100 steps per second, moving about 8 nanometers with each step. When not carrying cargo, kinesins can shift to energy-saving mode to conserve fuel until their next job. The kinesin plays a vital role in many cellular processes, not just transporting materials, but also aiding cell replication. The walking kinesin molecular machine, another example of intelligent design.
Isn't that fascinating? Did you know you've got trillions of those carrying stuff around your body? You look at something like that, and it just came together by itself. It's just amazing. The fourth reason why I can't believe in an atheist version of design is something called biomimicry. Biomimicry is a scientific study today that basically learns from, we'll call it Mother Nature. You've probably, who's heard of the Tesla bot? You know Tesla making robots at the moment? Have you noticed that basically what the Tesla bot is doing is looking at a human and trying to copy what a human is, copy the hands, the fingers, the feet. Biomimicry basically is acknowledging the fact that evolution, if you want to call it that, or Mother Nature or God, has managed to design things in such a good way that us highly intelligent people have to go and look at how it's working in order to be able to copy it for ourselves. And so biomimicry is a very, very popular science today. Millions and millions of dollars have been poured into it, studying nature to work out how we can learn from nature. And I could give you thousands of examples of biomimicry. I've just listed 3 or 4 here. Crash helmets, they were wondering how these woodpeckers were able to smash their heads against trees and basically make holes in trees without seriously damaging their brains and knocking themselves out. They studied the cushioning in the brain and so forth of a woodpecker, and they're incorporating that into crash helmets. Great idea, huh? Giraffes, they were wondering how a giraffe that's so tall could drink from the water and lift its head up without losing consciousness and falling over. Because that's what normally would happen, especially with a neck that long. And they studied the veins in the arteries in the neck and how that they constrict when the giraffe lifts its head up to stop it losing consciousness. And they're doing that for astronauts now, for their spacesuits, so they don't lose consciousness under gravity. Of course, we all know the Velcro, designed was designed when people saw the plant, those sticky plants. Velcro just basically looked at that and copied it. Adhesive from geckos' feet has been made at the moment, wondering how they can stick to the walls. There's hundreds of examples I could give you of biomimicry. To me, those 4 things very, very clearly speak about intelligent design. It's so intelligent is the design that we're actually having to learn from it. Scripture teaches that God is the originator, the creator, and the sustainer of all things. Isaiah 40 verse 12 says, "Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span? Enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance." God is the originator, the creator, and the sustainer of all things. The last question that I want, so we talked about creation requires a creator, design requires a designer, and in both of those instances, God is the best option. The third and the last question is, life requires a life giver. How does life arise or come from non-life? Where did the first life come from? Experience tells us that life only comes from life. We know babies come from pregnant woman. We know that plants come from seeds. We know that animals and chicks and so forth come from eggs. We understand that life comes from life. The spontaneous generation of life from non-life has never been observed. I've got a pet rock at home called Uchi. It's painted with eyes and a mouth, and it's a favorite pet of mine and of my little grandchild. Unfortunately, as much as I've talked about Uchi and shared about Uchi and shared all the tricks that Uchi can do, if I throw it in the air, it comes back to me. If I roll it down a hill, it rolls. It doesn't swim very well. no matter how much I've tried, it does not come alive because rocks don't give birth as a general rule. We understand that. What are the theories on the origin of life that an atheist comes up with? Well, there's basically only 4 that are worth mentioning. The first one, and probably one of the most common ones, is that life came from a primordial soup. Life arose from simple inorganic molecules in a primordial soup on the early Earth. And energy was provided by lightning strikes on the early Earth. So it was a dirty, scummy pond. It had some amino acids in it. Lightning struck it, and life was formed. That's a theory. The deep sea hydrothermal vents, they say maybe deep under the ocean where it's all warm and there's hydrothermal vents and there's lots of nutrients and so forth, maybe life started down deep in the ocean with hydrothermal vents. Another theory is what we call panspermia. Basically says, look, we don't understand how life could have created on the earth because the early earth, according to atheists, was a terrible place. It didn't have any oxygen. It was hot. We don't understand how earth could have created. But what we think could have happened is that life started on another planet and came to us on a meteorite or an asteroid. And that asteroid hit the earth and that had life on it. And that's how life came to earth. Well, that's a great theory, except it doesn't answer the question. Because it just kicks the can down the road again. Where did the asteroid get life from? Where, it doesn't solve the problem of where life came from. And some people go so far as to say, and it's quite, you can laugh at this, but scientists say maybe life came to Earth from an alien species. They came and they created life on Earth and then made the pyramids and disappeared. Bottom line is, that doesn't answer the question, where did that life come from? And then, of course, the last theory is what they call the RNA world hypothesis. And they're basically saying, because everyone knows, generally you would have DNA, and then RNA replicates the DNA. But they're saying that maybe in the past, it's never been seen, we can't prove it, but maybe RNA, which is the simpler form of DNA, basically existed first, and that basically life on Earth began with simple RNA molecule that could copy itself without help from other molecules. It's a big problem when you need life. You need to have any type of meaningful life. You need the ability of a cell to replicate itself. Now, I don't know, it's not easy for a cell to replicate itself. All right? If I asked you to duplicate yourself, you would have a problem doing that. But somehow the first cell suddenly managed to survive, and it managed to replicate itself without having the SEX word. Okay? So that is a real problem. These hypotheses, it copies itself. Obviously, there's a lot of responses I could give to this, but I just want to mention one that's mentioned in all the books. And if you go to university, you'll still see it. And that's the famous Miller-Urey experiment. Basically, in 1952, scientists wanted to prove that life could have started on early Earth. And what they did is they got a jar and they put gases in it, and they tried to recreate the environment of what they think early Earth must have looked like. It wasn't the Garden of Eden, according to them, trust me. It was hot and humid, and it didn't have any oxygen. And they put all these gases together, hydrogen and so forth, and then they put electricity through it to simulate lightning strikes, and they wanted to try and prove that they could create life. Well, they didn't create life, as you can imagine, but they hailed the experiment as a big success because they managed to create a few amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, which are obviously the building blocks of life. Amino acids are a long way from life, a long way. But they supposedly created some amino acids. The problem is and it's come to recently been revealed, that they cooked the books a lot. The gases they used were incorrect. They excluded oxygen because they knew that it would destroy the bondings. They created the wrong quantities of left and right-handed amino acids. And I could give you a list. Normally there's a list of about 20 things that they did wrong. All you need to know is that the Miller-Urey experiment did nothing to prove that life can start by itself. In fact, it probably did the opposite. Okay, it did the opposite. There's an interesting phrase there, abiogenesis at first and biogenesis ever since. It's taught in all universities today. Abiogenesis means life from non-life, and then biogenesis is life from life. What they're basically teaching people is that very first Earth, abiogenesis occurred. In other words, life came from non-life, but ever since then, it can only come from life, which is inconvenient. I wonder why it suddenly decided it couldn't do that today. I'd love to see abiogenesis today. All right, so there you go. Panspermia, well, obviously, you know, it doesn't take a genius to realize that if you're going to try and bring life to Earth on a comet or an asteroid, space is a pretty harsh place for life to exist, and burning up through the atmosphere and smashing at the Earth at thousands of kilometers an hour probably isn't that good for life either. So, you know, it's not particularly good, and it doesn't answer the question of how did life get onto the asteroid in the first place. Again, these theories just don't satisfy me intellectually. We talk about, a lot of people, evolutionists, talk about the first simple cell. Life arose in the first simple cell, and the first simple cell managed to duplicate itself. There is no such thing as a simple cell. Dawkins, when evolution first started looking at how life began, they didn't have good telescopes and things like that. They thought that a simple cell was just a bunch of jelly floating around in some proteins, and that was it. We've since then got telescopes and electron telescopes and so forth where we can look at a simple cell as anything but simple. It is a city in a sack. It's got delivery systems, it's got storage systems, it's got communication systems, it's got transport systems, it's got memory systems, it's got information. It is a seriously complex thing. And that is a very good example of irreducible complexity. If you take a simple cell and you say, we're going to take away the protective wall, the cell's going to die. We're going to take away the communication system, it's going to die. We're going to take away this, we're going to take... Cells are cells, all right? The human body is a living sculpture, a masterpiece of design and function that inspires awe and wonder. I quickly want to just show you 3 or 4 pictures of nature's artwork. I always love to show these. These are actual photographs of actual creatures. There's a fly there. You'll notice imprinted upon the wings of this fly are 2 ants, an ant on each wing. That is designed to scare away predators. I have to look at that and think, my goodness, how did a picture of an ant on a wing of a fly evolve without any intelligence? How does that happen? You have a look at the moth. You will see 2 flies feeding on goo of some sort on the wings of the moth. How did that evolve? And then, of course, you've got the spider moth. That I don't know if you can make that up, but that is actually a spider imprinted, tattooed on the wings of a moth, so that when the moth bends down and spreads its wings, it looks exactly like a spider. Can you make out? You can see the moth's wings there in the head. All right. So the difference, and I love this. This is from Charles Dickens. The difference between a construction and a creation is this: a thing constructed can only be loved after it is built, but a thing created is loved before it exists. Amen.
We do not know how to build even a simple bacterium. The simplest bacterium with its 256 protein coding genes, we have no idea how to build it. First of all, we don't know how to build the molecules, the 4 classes of molecules that are needed for it. We don't know how to, even if we had those 4 classes of molecules, assemble them even into the simplest of bacteriums. We don't know how to do that. One can do that with the technologies we have today. We can make technologies, but we can't even make the simplest bacterium. Anybody who would say something contrary does not know what they are talking about. Show me the demonstration. Nobody has ever done it. And it's not because of lack of effort. It's not because of lack of will. First of all, they haven't been able to get the molecules to do this. And if they could make the molecules, even if we were to give them the molecules, they wouldn't have the information there would be no inherent information in the DNA. But even if we gave them the DNA in the structure that they wanted, they wouldn't know how to put all the components together because of the sophistication within a cell.
That is probably one of the most famous molecular biologists in the world today. Nobel Prizes, head of the Genome Institute. This is not some Mickey Mouse dude. This is serious science here, telling you that we have absolutely no idea how to create life at all, not even close. And despite what you might read and told you, they did an interview recently and they asked a whole bunch of students if they thought that scientists had created life in the laboratory. People thought, most of this, over 50% of the respondents said yes, they thought they'd created life in the laboratory, frogs and things like that. We can't create anywhere near creating life, not even close. Scripture says that life is only found in God. We were made by God and for God, and only in Him does life have purpose and meaning. Then the Lord formed man from the dust of the ground. He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. It is only God and the breath of God that can bring something that is not alive to become alive. Unless God is going to breathe on your AI, it's not going to be alive. It's not going to have intelligence. Psalm 139, verse 13, 14, you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And I praise you because I'm fearfully and I'm wonderfully made. You can see God from everywhere if your mind is set to love and to obey Him. And I think the reason why people cannot see God in creation, they cannot see God in design, and they cannot understand how first life, that God alone can give life, is because they have not set their mind to love and obey Him. God has made Himself known. Okay, I'm not going to read all of this, but no atheist will be able to stand before God and say, you didn't reveal yourself, you didn't make yourself known. Creation screams God. Design screams God. And living things scream God. Jeremiah 29 verse 13 is the promise that you will seek me and you will find me when you seek for me with all your heart. If you do not find God, it's because you've not sought for Him. And then the end, the quote from C.S. Lewis, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. Thank you, everybody. I hope you got something out of that. All right. 1 minute over 8. We did well. Thank you, everybody. I really love you guys. Next week, we're going to just cover heaven. What's happening in heaven? I'm going to not only cover heaven, but I want to talk a little bit about the events leading up to the heaven. What's going to happen what does the Bible teach in Revelation and in Daniel and Ezekiel about the future? What's going to happen? We'll talk about the mark of the beast. We'll talk about the Antichrist. We'll talk about all of these other bits and pieces that people want to know about. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those things. All right. Thank you.